It's time to take command with former NFL tight end Logan Paulsen and former Commanders beat reporter Craig Hoffman.
What's up? What's happening? Welcome in. It is the Take Command podcast. Happy New Year, everybody. We got one more regular season game to go, and then playoffs. Going to be a good time this weekend for you in Dallas, Logan. We'll have a post-game show. Actually, I got to see on the post-game show. What we might do is wait actually till Monday because then we can also talk a little bit, first look at the playoff matchup, but we'll see what time the announcement comes out. Typically, the playoff opponents and schedule and everything comes out during the Sunday night game, but with everything but the Detroit-Minnesota game being set pretty much after the 4 o'clock window, we might get it a little bit earlier this year. We will see what the NFL League Office bestows upon us in terms of the playoff timing and operate from there. But that's why you subscribe, Logan. If you subscribe to YouTube, you subscribe to the podcast, as soon as it's ready, / as soon as we go live, people will know.
Yeah, just to eliminate any of those surprises, those surprise playoff updates.
Yeah, so, that's our advice to you here in 2025. New Year's resolution. Subscribe. Okay, here's what we're going to do today. We're going to preview this final game for the Commanders against the Cowboys. We're going to take a look back at some of the things that went well and didn't in what was the wildest game amongst all the wild games the Commanders have played this season. I don't think any is wilder than that Dallas game. The 33 points scored in the first, or 31 points scored in the final 3:30 of that game is a record for the Super Bowl era. So it was just an absolutely bananas football game. And we'll try to make sense of it in terms of what Washington should try to do this time around. That said, it is a different Dallas team and a different Washington team. Some key pieces out for either side. We'll get to those as we go. But before we get to all that, Logan, before we get to the specifics, you played in games at the end of a season where you are both of these teams. You've clinched and you're in, and you're just trying to get through the game and then get to the playoffs. And the biggest thing for you on Sunday is the release of that playoff schedule. And you've also played in games where you're like, this is the last game of the season. We've already been eliminated. We got to go be professionals. I'm playing for myself. I'm playing for my future, whatever other motivations you might have. Let's start with Washington's side of it. What's your mindset if you're a Commander going into this game, given the situation, record-wise, playoff-wise, et cetera?
I think you're probably pretty juiced, and what I mean by that, it's like when you're the Dallas Cowboys, everything kind of feels like there's a finite thing, and we'll talk about that more in a second. But when you have an opportunity to make a push for the playoffs, it's exciting. And when I was with the team in 2012. Like, we needed this game to clinch the division, the last game of the season. And so obviously, we were really excited. It was against a division rival, and there was a lot to play for. And so I do think there are some similarities here. Obviously, Dallas has nothing to play for in this game. But I do think the idea that you want to kind of have a nice, maybe decisive win and then kind of put yourself in a better spot for a significant playoff push. I think the motivation is there, unlike Dallas, again, that being on the other team is much more difficult in this situation. Like here, the Commanders, they've got, someone was asking me the other day, should they rest their starters? I'm like, no, man, they've got stuff to play for in terms of seeding, for the playoffs, which is really important. So I don't think they'll do that. Dan said they weren't going to do that, but yeah, this is a meaningful game. There's a different energy. There's a different motivation about it that's exciting because there is a tomorrow. And that's something that's really, really cool and really kind of refreshing and motivating and exciting. And you are tired. You are a little run down. It's the last game of the year, but you do kind of get your second win making that push to the playoffs.
For sure. I think if you're Dan, the ideal is you're up 28-0 at halftime. And then you're like, all right, guys, we're good. We're gonna sit everybody in the second half. Dallas is not gonna make some massive comeback in the second half. They're probably gonna be mentally checked out, and we've seen that before too. Actually, it would have been 17 then of 2015. There was a couple of records to get an otherwise meaningless game late in the season, heading into the playoffs. Commanders had already clinched the division, albeit I think at 8-8 or maybe 9-7, but they had clinched. And Kirk needed a couple of touchdowns or whatever to set some record. They get those in the first half, and then Colt comes in and plays the second half, and they go into the playoffs. I think that's the ideal situation for Sunday, if we're being honest, because this is a group that's banged up. Yesterday they rested 7 or 8 guys in practice, so there's no doubt that the length of the season has worn on them a bit. But at the same time, getting that 3 seed is meaningful. Getting 12 wins is meaningful as like from an achievement standpoint. By the way, if Dan Quinn gets 12 wins this year, that's 4 years in a row, 3 as a coordinator in Dallas, and then this year that he would be part of a 12-win football team, which is pretty remarkable from a coaching achievement standpoint. So hats off to Dan, should he get that. But I think that, you just want to have that feel like you're rolling, like you're fresh. And I think also for this team, there's some stuff that they've won by hook or by crook. They figured out ways. I think they want to play well. There's actually a great quote from Mike Tomlin after their last game where he said, I don't care about losing control of the division. I care about the quality of our performance. And that's his concern in Pittsburgh. And if I'm Dan Quinn, that's kind of where I'm at, is like, I want to go out and play well. And if we play well, then I feel good going to the playoffs. If we win and it's like we're just finding a way again, I'm probably not going to feel as good going into whether it's LA, Tampa, Atlanta, Philly, wherever they wind up going.
Yeah, when I gave my, like how the guys feel, it's from a player perspective, but I definitely think as a coach, and I think if you're probably like Bobby Wagner, Zach Ertz, guys that have been around like winning playoff Super Bowl football in those guys' cases, one of the things I would point to is just like, look at last week's game versus the Atlanta Falcons, a lot of penalties, not super clean, couple of drops, like that's not a sustainable way to win versus really good football teams. And I think Atlanta's a fine football team, but they're a different cut than, the Tampa Bays, the LA Rams, the Philadelphia Eagles. And so I think, at times we've seen what that playoff, quote unquote, caliber of football looks like. I think back to the Cincinnati game. I think the Arizona game is a really good example of that, where you're playing really clean, really efficient. You're not giving up explosive plays. You're not busting things defensively. Offensively, you're really locked in. And I really think, in a perfect world as a coach, you want to make sure this Dallas game looks a lot like that. And I do think there's an opportunity for it to look like that, because I'll tell you, when you're playing on the other side of this thing, like it is very hard. Very, very hard to kind of be at your best mentally, right? Because you got Cancun looming around the corner, like you were saying in the production meeting, right? And I think that's a really good iteration of it, right? So, I never went to Cancun, but I got time with my family on deck. I got the first kind of decompress of my season or my year, and you're just like, don't get hurt, like play as well as you can. But there's always in the back of your mind kind of this rate limiter on you, because you got vacation coming up. So I do think like if there's a game to do it, let's do it this week, right? Let's make sure that we're really locked in. We're playing penalty-free football, and we do what we're supposed to do, and we do what we're capable of doing, or the Commanders do what they're capable of doing, and get a nice definitive win. And they might not be up enough to rest the starters, but I do think a 30-20 win, just to kind of like a 10-point win, is a perfectly reasonable thing. You might not get to rest the starters or whatever, but I think you're looking for something like that, where you're getting great contact on the ball, feeling like a jumping off point for later in the playoffs.
For sure. And the thing is, for someone who is, say, like you in your position, right? And you've talked about this, like you were a fringe, like I always got to make sure I'm playing my best. Like I'm playing for my next contract. Out once you got off your rookie deal, like you're on a lot of 1-year deals in your career, and you just kept getting the next one. Mm-hmm. That's a lot of the NFL. Like half the NFL is like that. But then also, if you're a star player, like imagine if you're Micah Parsons. If I'm Micah Parsons, frankly, I do not want to play in this game, because the only thing that can happen to me is something bad. He is someone who should be getting paid this summer or this offseason. And like, not that I think almost any injury is going to not cause him to get paid.
No, but it's like, but it's a great point. It's like, if I'm him,
why would you want to risk it?
I don't want anything. So for me, I remember this was in 2000, I think it was 2011. We were playing Philadelphia in the last game of the year, and I'm playing like an absolute maniac, because that's just what I did. Like I had to do that and I remember multiple times in the game, like there was a DB and a linebacker and a defensive end, and I was like, man, you gotta chill out. Like I'm going on vacation after. Like literally someone said, you have to calm down. I'm going on vacation, from the other team. So like obviously people are like, I want to get out of here unscathed, uninjured, and like let's keep this thing moving. And the people like Micah Parsons, that's a huge priority for them. Like for me, it's super important, because I'm going to be a free agent. I need to have
right. You're just trying to get one last game of good tape.
Yeah, right. And so everyone kind of has a different approach. And I do think the better you are, the more annoying this game is, in terms of what it means for you. And I'm not saying they're not going to play hard. They're pros, they're competitors, all those different things, but it's a business too. And your industry is your body. And so in a game like this, you're taking meaningless, like literally meaningless hits, because everyone knows Micah Parsons is a beast. So it's like, why do I need to mess with this? You know what I'm saying? Like, so,
Right.
or like Kendricks, the middle linebacker, is a little bit banged up. It's like, everyone knows what he can do. He doesn't need to go out there.
And frankly, like if I'm the team, I'm not playing. If I'm the Cowboys, I'm not playing Micah Parsons in this game, because I don't think people realize necessarily. Because like, oh, it's the offseason. If you get hurt, like you just heal up. Like being hurt going into the offseason messes up your offseason, which is the time that you get better. Zach Ertz talked about this with us before the season. That part of the reason that this season, like he felt really good going into it, and we've seen what he's been able to do, is because he actually got to last offseason healthy, because he played so little last year and then finished the year like on Detroit's practice squad, I think it was. He actually went into the offseason healthy. He was able to do what he wanted with his body in the offseason, and that set him up to be successful this year. And we've seen he's 600 catches, whatever number of yards, made $750K in bonuses on Sunday. Like, nice season, Zach. And so I think that if I'm the Cowboys and I want to ensure that I'm my best next year, like I want Micah Parsons healthy this offseason. I want anybody else that's important to me healthy this offseason. And not that you can just sit a bunch, not that you can sit everybody and elevate your practice squad entirely, but like also why not? Like that's kind of how I would approach it as an organization, but that's a Cowboys decision, not the Commanders.
Yeah, and we don't have any, there's no inside baseball in there, but I don't disagree with you. And again, I think
when we run a football team one day, Logan, that's how we're operating. If we ever, I mean, we're going to win everything, so like we don't have to worry about this at the end of the season, but just in case.
Just in case. I do think that there are, like the league has rules about doing stuff like that. You got to make sure that the guys are on the injury report, all that kind of stuff. But
sure.
I don't think it's a bad idea. And again, we got into this conversation just to kind of emphasize this point that Dallas is going to have their own mental adversity to kind of negotiate here. And to me, this is going to show you what kind of coach Mike McCarthy is, or Zimmer, or whoever is the coordinators are over there. Like, if you can get these guys playing good football in the last game of the year, like that shows you something. So if you're Jerry Jones and they come out and they're flying around playing tough, like, you've got the right guy motivating them. You've got the right guy kind of instilling the competitive fire in them. It's just, I think it's extremely hard to do. Having done it a bunch of times in my career, did it in Chicago a year, did it in San Fran. Like, you're just out there and everyone's just thinking about getting the hell out and being healthy. So you need the right kind of motivator. And I do think, to McCarthy's credit, they've been playing a lot better football the last couple of weeks. They've been playing really hard. So maybe this is a good kind of feather in his cap, kind of saying I deserve to be the coach next year kind of deal for Jerry Jones. But that's another conversation.
Yeah, he's trying. There's some rumblings for sure that could be the case. But they also might have, hands in 1-2-3 Cancun last week against the Eagles, where they got smashed 41-7. So let's talk about the game itself now that we've set the stakes. Take Command Podcast. Craig Hoffman here. Logan Paulson there. Let's take a look at the Commanders' offense, led by newly minted Pro Bowler Jaden Daniels, throwing to newly minted Pro Bowler, again, Terry McLaurin. Congratulations to Jaden and Terry for being named Pro Bowl starters. Very, very, very deserved on both fronts. I'm really glad, frankly, to see Terry get that recognition. There's so many great wide receivers in the league right now doing so many things, but he's right up there in yards, right up there in touchdowns with all of them. And he's had just a tremendous year showing what he's capable of once you get him a Pro Bowl caliber quarterback. And that's what Jaden was in year one. One of his roughest games, though, perhaps, was against the Dallas Cowboys that last time out. Now, some of it was not his fault. He had that weird interception where he hits B-Rob in the hands on the screen, and B-Rob just accidentally whoopsies it right to a Dallas defender. But there was real struggles in that game. Jaden, against man coverage, 1 for 9, took 4 sacks, had 2 interceptions. That was against pressure in that first matchup. So they really were able to get home in a way that a lot of other teams hadn't to that point against Daniels. And so when you look at this rematch, Logan, how do they protect Jaden? And what do you think some of the big picture things they do to try to get this offense going in a way it just could not in the first matchup?
Yeah, this game is so fascinating to me just in the prep and kind of reviewing what happened in the last matchup, just because I really feel like the Dallas Cowboys defensively came out with like a really excellent plan, specifically their pressure plan. And that's what, Zimmer's kind of known for, is these kind of game plan pressures on third and long situations. And you saw a little bit of that. And he has probably some of the best pressures I've seen over the course of this year in terms of putting the offensive line and their protection rules in conflict. And you've seen a couple teams try to bring similar pressures, especially when they've got the Commanders have those chip players in there, and just kind of mess with those rules and maximize their rush. And I really think like that was something that really stood out to me, is not only were they able to kind of cultivate a unique pressure plan, probably 3 or 4 third downs, probably 3 third downs where there's really like some exotic pressure and really great job scheming it up. There's a first down, the first down of the game. They're trying to take a shot down the field. The Commanders they bring a 4-man overload to the play action side, to the man side of the protection, and they have to flush Jaden from the pocket. So really looking forward to seeing how this offense and Cliff kind of evolve and kind of say, hey, we can kind of corral some of these pressure looks. The other thing is what they're going to do with Micah Parsons on the interior.
Right.
Obviously, like prior to that last matchup, they were pretty much like Micah's going to play defensive end, and then all of a sudden he probably has 5 to 10 snaps where he's lined up as a defensive tackle.
He's got six listed per PFF as defensive tackle, then a couple more where he's technically like a middle linebacker. So, I guess that's maybe one's hand in the dirt, one's he's in a 2-point stance, but like he's in there that 6 to 10 times.
Right, but in terms of the pressure question, like you get 3 unblocked pressures, which are good design. Then you get a couple of really quick wins by Micah Parsons, and all of a sudden, out of, I forget how many third downs they had, it was like 12 or something like that, whatever the number is. But you have over half of them where you have quick pressures, and Jaden can't be Jaden Daniels in terms of survey the field, make good decisions as a thrower and a runner. So to me, that's going to be really interesting. And then the other thing you talked about was kind of the coverage structures they played. They played a lot of man. They also played a ton of quarters. They played a lot of 6. They played a lot of kind of single high, no plug player underneath because they're bringing 5-man rushes. They just brought a lot of different stuff to Jaden Daniels. And so what does this look like? How do you handle that kind of variety? We've seen him handle the Philadelphia Eagles, which is to me one of the best defenses in football. We saw what he did versus Atlanta last week, because they bring a lot of different stuff. I think also New Orleans, just kind of different levels of variety. But for whatever reason, it kind of caught him off guard. And I think that was kind of coming into the doldrum area of his season, like right before the bye.
I was going to say, yeah, that's something that I was, as you were talking, we didn't talk about this in our production meeting, our pre-show meeting, but okay, bringing a ton of pressure. That's worked for some teams, but most of them were kind of in that weeks, let's say 9 to 13-ish, when the rib injury was an issue for him more than we realized at the time, because now we're like reminded this is what healthy Jaden looks like. Mm-hmm. And now some teams that have pressured him have lost out, including the Atlanta Falcons, who gave up 127 rushing yards to him last week. So I think it's probably worth pointing out that one, the Cowboys look different from a health perspective. Mainly DeMarion Overshown is not going to play in this game. He's out for the season. And he had a career-high 5 pressures and 1 sack on 13 pass rushes in that first game. But Jaden is going to be able to escape in a way that he couldn't the first time around, which seems like a relevant plot point.
Yeah, and I also think the style. So that's a great point. I'm glad you brought that up, and I think it's a good point to kind of give some context on, because obviously, Atlanta brings a lot of pressures. They, like some of their, simulated pressures and overload pressures were really great, and like really just well designed and well schemed up. The thing about the Dallas game, I think this was the last game where they just had a ton of free runners to the quarterback, like just kind of not mental mistakes, but literally like just breaking protections, like Overshown's running free in the A gap because of the style of pressure that they're bringing or the pattern that they're bringing. Micah Parsons is winning right now, and you haven't really seen that style of pass rush since Dallas. Right, since Dallas, you see a little bit from Philly, but again, it's a 4-man rush. They did some overload stuff. I think you saw that in the second matchup where Jaden's kind of got a little bit of pressure, but the quickness of the win was really just, it was incredible last game. So that's one thing that I'm curious to see how they handle. And then the other thing to kind of just piggyback off that point is, I remember talking about this post game and then going back and rewatch it. I felt the same way. Their first and second down efficiency generally in this game was a little bit spotty. And so you look at the Atlanta game and their first and second down efficiencies, great, right? Because Jaden Daniels is making great decisions as a runner. They've got the quick game going. They're kind of always in relationship to the sticks, or in the relationship they want to be in the sticks. And I remember in the Dallas game, there was a lot of situations where they weren't. And like, you get to a 3rd and 4, and then you drop the slant on that down and distance. And so there was just a lot of things like that in the game where they're what they wanted to be, like versus Atlanta. I think this is a good example. So versus Atlanta, they were really hyper efficient, like whether it was the scrambling, whether it was the quick game, whatever it was, they were really efficient. They possessed the ball for big chunks of that game and not a lot of big plays, right? And then you look at kind of the other game, which is the Philly game, and they're able to find not a lot of efficiency, but a couple big plays. And in the Dallas game, they weren't really able to do either one of those things well. They couldn't find the explosive play, and they weren't overly efficient. And obviously the explosive plays come in the fourth quarter where it's that crazy comeback, and they're like all of a sudden in a dogfight, which didn't really feel like, it kind of felt like it was out of reach the whole time. But I do think that's going to be also very interesting is, can you be efficient or can you be explosive? And they've won games when they can do one or the other. And obviously Dallas was the last time they weren't really able to do either.
Right. So when you look at the strategy of being either efficient or explosive, one, do you have to choose? And two, which choice would you make? Because it felt like they definitely made a choice in the first game. The choice was, we're going to try to be explosive. It didn't work, and that really was tough sledding. Now, you might say, okay, we'll just go with the efficiency route. Well, Philly hits a bunch of big explosive plays in their game last week, and they put up 41.
Yeah.
3 of their 5 touchdowns, I think, are 20-plus yarders. I mean, they're in the high, they're just outside the red zone, but there are those 20-plus yard shots into the end zone. Some of that was, by the way, basic day one install stuff. They scored a touchdown on Dusty. They scored one on like a smash slot fade concept, and you're like, that is easy stuff. That's Philly though. They have AJ Brown and Devontae Smith, and so they can run simple stuff, and it works exceptionally well. But if you're Cliff thinking about what happened in that first game and who you want to be, do you try to just hit a bunch of quick game? And also, I think it's worth mentioning 2 other factors, or one other factor here in 2 prongs. Your own personnel, right? If Tyler Biotish is out, that's going to change how you feel about your protection, both getting called and it getting executed. And if De'Ami Brown is out, and both those guys missed practice on Wednesday, which as we record this Thursday morning is the latest information that we have, if De'Ami Brown is out, you're very limited on your explosive downplay receiving threats. So that seems like a relevant plot point as well as you put together a game plan and make that decision.
Yeah, and what I would say is, just after watching the Dallas game, I really liked how aggressive Cliff was, but I just think it was just like a little bit too much. And again, it's easy for me to play Monday morning quarterback and kind of make that assessment, but I would just say, just be a little bit more selective about your explosive opportunities, right? Just be a little bit more deliberate about, it doesn't need to be every first down, doesn't need to be every time you cross the 50. Like, if you're feeling good and the quarterback's locked in, like, make that throw. The other thing I would say too, which I noticed on rewatch, which was a little surprising, is Cliff, I think throughout the year, has just done a fantastic job of getting Jaden comfortable very early in the game. Like, we got a quick completion, we got a click whatever, and that wasn't really there. Like, their first downfield shot, because it comes off a turnover, is like Terry's running what I would call like a Skinner. Like, there's double posts to the offensive left, and there's a little bit of a rush. Jaden has to scramble out, but like, there isn't an easy completion for him until, and it's not really Cliff's fault, because like game flow situation kind of lead to that. But I'd say, like, let's make sure he's settled in. He's the best player on the field for the Commanders on offense usually. Let's make sure he's settled in, feels comfortable. And then just to Cliff, like, let's make sure that we can kind of play both sides, like you're saying. I don't think you need to make a choice. I think, lean into the quick game, lean into the rushing attack. Those are things that have been really, like, when you look at how effective they've been throughout the year, are really just top shelf items for this team in terms of efficiency. Then when you get kind of that play, that moment, call it. And it doesn't need to be every, like there was times in the New Orleans game where you could feel Cliff trying to get the big play, right? And so every first down, he's taking a shot. And they just couldn't execute. The coverage is good. The rush gets home, whatever it is. But, like, let's make sure it's one we love, when we know we feel very confident we're going to hit. It's got answers, and let's call it then, as opposed to kind of that I don't know, that urgency to get the chunk, I guess.
For sure. And I think especially because of how well they're executing recently in the red zone, you don't have to score on big plays. Like, I'm okay getting down to the red zone. And some teams are just so bad down there. It's like, all we're going to do is drive between the 20s and then kick a field goal. I don't want to do that. And especially with the state of kicking this year in the NFL, some teams might not trust their kicker. Like, Washington is in a situation where they have been excellent in the red zone, especially in the back half of the season. So there should be no fear of just, all right, fine, you're going to give us stuff underneath and we're going to be able to run the football and like we can do our in between the 20 stuff. Fine, we get to the 18-yard line, like we're going to go score. We're going to get another 10 yards. We're going to get down to the 8. We'll get another 6 yards, get to the 2, and then you have to deal with Jaden Daniels on a zone read, triple option pass situation. Like,
right.
We trust that. That if you give us 3 shots at it, we'll be able to get in. So I think that also should influence the play calling. One last piece of this that is we should spend a little bit of time on just because we don't know, but certainly something that we can spend more time on previewing the playoff game, because I would imagine that is definitely when this guy plays. Austin Eckler might be coming back.
Right.
They've opened his 21-day practice window. He was a full participant Wednesday. If I were them, I'd definitely want to see if I can knock a rust off before he just goes full bore in a playoff game. But as they look for options for explosive plays, they got so many from Austin early in the season. I would definitely consider, that as an option in the screen game or using him in a variety of ways. And they didn't have that option in the first game because he got hurt against. Actually, no, that's the game he got hurt. It was late in that game against Dallas. So, what would he bring back to this offense in terms of accomplishing both the explosiveness goal and the efficiency goal?
Well, I think that's exactly what you're looking for, right? Is just those explosive opportunities. And everyone says, "Oh, you might not score on the explosive plays," but it does make it more likely to score. Like, even if you just got like a 30 or 40 yard chunk, like, it's just less times you have to screw something up as an offense, right? And that's one of the reasons why when they go on these 7-minute drives, and there was 2 of them last week versus Atlanta, you're kind of like, that's so unusual, because on one of those drives, and we saw a little bit of it and we talked about it in the review show, is you get a penalty, you get a holding, you get a drop pass, and it derails the whole drive and you can't overcome it. And obviously they were able to do something really special and overcome a bunch of penalties and overcome some drop passes and just general kind of lack of like super sharp football. But usually that's the exception, not the norm. And so with Austin, again, like, he gives you like, hey, here's a little screen, here's a bubble pass or a draw that I'm able to kind of turn into a 15, 20 yard game. That's an explosive play, right? That's all we're saying. So it just eliminates the idea of having to go 5 plays to get to 25 yards, and there's 5 opportunities to get a hold, to get a drop pass, to get a sack, whatever it is, and all of a sudden we're there. So I'd say that's when I look at him and his skill set and what he did so well early in the year, and what Cliff did so well, and Anthony Lynn and the whole staff did well, is really just kind of saying, hey, like, Austin, like, we're going to make sure that you find these opportunities, and Austin did a great job executing on them. So I think if he came back, that would be definitely something I'd look at. But I don't know. To your point, like, the rust thing is interesting, because guys who haven't played a lot of football, and I know he's played a lot of football in his career, but coming back off something like that, it'd be interesting to see like where his headspace is at, and you might want to get him a couple touches just to see how comfortable he is again before you like need him in the playoffs.
For sure. And, it's something talking about Eckler, I was reminded of from the first game too. They had great field position all day and could not take advantage.
Yeah.
So, making sure they maximize these opportunities. So that'll be definitely interesting to watch. Anything else on the offense? I guess we should talk quickly about the run game and the ability to get that going with or without Eckler. B-Rob, it's funny because last week everyone's like, oh, B-Rob was like, the narrative, right, is B-Rob had a bad day. Chris Rodriguez was awesome. We need more Chris Rodriguez. And I think emotionally, like, we kind of felt that way almost after the game. I certainly did. And then you go back and look at the numbers and you're like, Chris Rodriguez had the greatest 6 carries for 15 yards in NFL history. Because I actually should look up the number. I'll try to do this as you talk here. The amount of yards he had after contact last week was definitely greater than his actual rushing total. Because he got hit so often behind the line of scrimmage and then made it work. But B-Rob also had a pretty good day by the end of it. I mean, he hit some big gashes in the second half. So what do they do, or what do you think they can do well against Dallas to have that part of the game, both Jaden and the quarterback run game, but also the designed running back running game, get back on track heading here into the playoffs?
Yeah, I'm really glad you brought that up about B-Rob, because I did think he had a very effective performance versus Atlanta, and I know it didn't probably feel that way, but when you go back and watch the tape, it's there on film. The thing that sticks out to me about the last matchup is just how aggressive and how fast Dallas's defense was at penetrating, and we've talked about this a bunch when the Commanders have played Philly, obviously getting ready for Grady Jarrett, but when there's like these fast penetrating defensive linemen, it seems to give the Commanders a really tough time. And obviously they've installed a little bit of trap, they've installed some wham, which is a good way to deal with that. So I'd expect to see more of that. The other thing I'd expect to see is more of that pre-snap motion and kind of jet motion, just like right before the snap that you saw versus New Orleans, as a way to get their safeties and corners to soften up and kind of be a little bit less aggressive in the run fit. Because like as we were talking in our pregame meeting, like their leading tacklers are Eric Kendricks, who's the middle linebackers, that makes sense, Donovan Wilson, who's a safety, and Malik Hooker, who's also a safety. So like their safeties and run support are a big deal, but they also have coverage responsibilities. So like if you look at what Atlanta did to the Commanders in the first half of that game last week, they did a lot of stuff just with formation to make those run fits a little bit harder. And Cliff has done an excellent job of that throughout the year. So I would expect to see a little bit more of that in terms of like, hey, we got to deal with the penetrator. We just talked about our traps and our whams, and just kind of making that a point of emphasis mentally when we're talking about this team. But also like, let's get in some different formations, spread them out a little bit, give them a little bit of eye candy beforehand, and really make them think about where's my fit, how do I get into this run? And I think there'll be more opportunities there. And I think one of the things that stuck out to me about the last matchup is it felt like they were like, we can run Baltimore's runs. We can do what the Baltimore Ravens did to the Dallas Cowboys. And I think that game was earlier in the season, maybe like week 3 or 4. And obviously the Baltimore Ravens rushed for some ungodly amount of number. And as we've talked about, like our offensive line is good. They're tough. They're physical. They're smart players, but they're not that mauling group that Baltimore has cultivated, right? They need a little bit of help. And so I do think understanding that and having that context around this team, makes this matchup a little bit more exciting from a run game standpoint, because I do think they get a little loose in the back end because they're having guys from fit runs from quarters positions, which is 10 yards off the ball. So you can mess with them a little bit. And so I'd like to see that. And I do think you can cultivate a really fleshed out rushing attack versus this team. And I expect them to be much more effective because, again, they kind of understand what this team does and what they want to do from a run stopping standpoint.
For sure. And just to close the loop on Chris Rodriguez's performance against the Falcons, he did indeed have more rush yards after contact than he did rush yards. He had just 5 carries in the game for 16 yards, but it was 23 yards after contact, an average of 4.6 yards per attempt after contact.
That's wild, man.
Yeah.
So on both of his, on a couple of his, getting hit way behind the line of scrimmage. Yeah, it makes sense, man. He did have a good day. And, B. Rob's doing a great job. And that's kind of one of the things you talk about Austin Eckler. I'm curious to see what they do with Chris because he's kind of been the flex guy. So he's even up this week if Austin's back. I don't know. But
yeah, and he plays teams as well. So you can finagle some things. Yeah, I definitely wonder how they move the roster around. I mean, they're heavy. I guess maybe they're not heavy at receiver if Diami's out. I don't know.
It's because of kind of the injury situation. They got to keep certain guys up at certain spots, and all of a sudden, kind of the roster math, if you want to get Austin back, is tough. And that's why that's one of the reasons Adam Peters and that staff make a ton of money because of all the shifting and the people and this guy's up and this guy's down type deal. So.
It's just unrealistic to have 4 guys up and plan on using them all too. So McNichols, Eckler, C-Rod, B-Rob, they're not all gonna get touches. So the thing is though, I don't want to cut Rodriguez. That's the thing is I want to make sure that he's still on the roster just in case. But I also don't know that he's going to be active on game day.
Right.
I also wonder with the receiver situation, we made a big deal about KJ Osborne when he got signed because it happened right. He's a guy that got claimed. He's had some nice numbers. He didn't really do a lot last week. And he's been inactive every week until last week. So I don't know. Maybe that's something where if hey, Bryson Tremaine can play teams for us. Do we call up Bryson and then he actually does a lot of the blocking stuff that we hoped KJ Osborne would do because he's not learning our offense fast enough or whatever. And I don't know why KJ has been down versus the other guys that have been up. But he definitely did not have a lot of snaps last week. I'll put it that way. So that is something to keep an eye on as well. And then again, maybe by the time that folks are listening to this, you save the preview pod for Sunday morning. you have all the answers because they've done all this stuff already. But we will see. And obviously, we always have the injury report as soon as it comes out on Friday at about 4:15-ish on the Hoffman Show live on the radio. So tune us in on the Team 980. Take Command Podcast. That's Logan Paulson. I am Craig Hoffman, talking about the Commanders' defense taking on a Dallas Cowboys offense that has lost its biggest fang, if you will, Logan. CeeDee Lamb is not going to play on Sunday. He did not play against the Eagles either after they shut him down following that win that they had on Sunday Night Football against the Bucs, where he just gutted out a tremendous performance through that shoulder injury, but enough was enough, and they've shut Lamb down for the season. Now, the first time out, Rico Dowdle had one of his better games of the season to that point. He's now a 1,000-yard rusher for the Cowboys. Cooper Rush had a nice day, but just a fundamentally different offense, Logan, with CeeDee Lamb out. Of course, the Commanders have their own issues at corner that we can get into, but how different did this Cowboys offense look last week without Lamb compared to, say, what Washington saw the first time around?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, watching anything versus that Philly defense is tough to get a gauge on because, man, they are so gosh darn good. And I just think when you've lost like your biggest weapon, and it's not like, you know, I was looking at the numbers. I sent you an email about this, but like he proportionally, his target share, his rush share is so high in this offense. He constitutes so much of the production of the offense that when he's out, you feel it immediately. There's no, when he's in, the offense is, we're going to get the ball to CD 15 to 20 times a game. Like, that's the offense. And all of a sudden you lose that focus, you lose that direction, and there's nobody really there that can pick it up. And there's no one there that can pick it up, even in the aggregate, which is really surprising when you watch him. When you watch the offense, it just feels kind of toothless, a little directionless. Now, you're going to give a lot of credit to Philly in that game because they did an excellent job, man. And they're just a good group, man. They're just really, really good. They're dynamic in the front. They're dynamic in the back end. And I still think back to our Philly game, and I'm like, how did we win that football game with how well that defensive group is playing? But so that's the thing to me. Is like, there's not like, oh, well, on this offense, when Terry's kind of having a enough day, like we feel comfortable with OZ and Zach and Jamison Crowder kind of elevating and getting a little bit more of that target share and being productive in the offense. To my eye, and maybe you feel differently, Craig, when I watched them last week, I wasn't like, this is what their plan is. Like, they're going to try and get Rico Dowdle going. Again, he had 26 touches, and I think that's appropriate. But in the passing game, there's nobody there. Jake Ferguson's their second target getter. He's got 80 on the year. But he's not like this dynamic, underneath tight end that you really got to worry about. Jalen Tolbert's doing a great job this year, but again, he's not like a true one that can kind of take over a game for you the same way. They are explosive with Kevontae Turpin. We saw that but again, they didn't really get him. He's not like a target guy. He's like a gadget guy. And so I come out of this game being like, I feel much better about this matchup if the Commanders' offense can put a little pressure on them, right? Because I think in the last matchup, watching back, I was like, man, the defense is actually playing pretty good. They're kind of creating consistent pressure on drop back situations. But as we talked about on the review show, there wasn't just a lot. There was a lot of like quick game, a lot of hitches, a lot of like quick slants, a lot of stuff underneath, because the Commanders defense was playing like a lot of cover 6, and there wasn't anything that was like no big chunk plays really, except for that play before the half. So to me, it's like, can you put a little pressure on them, force them to have to take shots down the field, force them out of the run game, and I think you kind of win this thing walking away because they don't have a great offensive identity at the moment.
I mean, I would sell out to stop the run in this game because that's the only thing that Washington struggled with the first time. Because even with Lamb out there, like, he had a ton of catches in that game, but not much on the yardage front. They did a really nice job of keeping everything in front. I would, when you don't have the best route runners, if you can demand precision out of an offense, like, you can play well. And that's the thing. It's like Kevontae Turpin, if you give him a one-on-one matchup and let him run straight, he might win that foot race. He's, in fact, probably going to win that foot race because he is that fast. And Jalen Tolbert's got some wheels as well. And so I don't want to be in one-on-one man situations. I want them to have to be precise. I want you to have to sit down exactly where you need to in a zone and make Cooper Rush read it out and make a precise throw, and that's just not who he is. In the first matchup against man coverage, he had 10 touch, or actually He was 8 of 11 for 129 yards and 2 TDs versus man. And that is generally how he's been this year. He is 10 touchdowns to 3 picks, 107.3 passer rating. That's ninth best in the NFL against man coverage.
Yeah.
His zone numbers are some of the worst in the league. So we're going to play a lot of zone coverage. We're going to, have Chin down in the box. And if he wants to bail out into a cover 2 or a cover 6 look, fine. I'm also fine with just playing some cover 3 and still demanding that precision. That's a little riskier because obviously those outside matchups kind of become one-on-one quasi-man situations.
Sure.
But I would want to, I don't want Rico Dowdle to beat me. But even so, okay, just don't give up the big one. And then make sure that you make Cooper Rush not have the easy, I can just pick a matchup and hope that my guy wins a foot race. Don't give him that stuff. And if you do that, because they lack their precision piece in CeeDee Lamb, I think you're set up for success defensively against this team.
And again, this is one of those things where you look back at the first matchup with this team, and you're like, man, the defense actually played pretty good. Outside of a handful of plays, you're like, man, they got some turnovers. They did a lot of really good things. But the offense wasn't able to support the game style, right? Which was keep everything in front, don't get beat by the big play. And the offense wasn't able to kind of support that. And so to me,
we talked about all the good field position that the offense wasted. That was created by the defense.
Right. And so and special teams. And so
right.
The other thing I'd say too is if the offense in this game can score, 10 points and Dallas has 0, this game flips dramatically. It's going to flip dramatically in terms of what they want to do, what they want to call. And I think you get this team to quit. And so to me, again, I think the defense of the last couple of weeks, and you look at the Atlanta game, you look at the New Orleans game, look at the Philly game specifically in the second half, there's a lot of really good things to take away from the defense. If they can play like that and the offense can score, just go out, possess the ball, score. We talked about this at the top of the show. This team, I would put a lot of money on it, would just say, hey, Cancun, baby. Let's get out of this thing on skate. Yeah, 1, 2, 3, Cancun. So I know we want to talk schematically about what they can do, but to me, it's Joe Witt Jr., do what you've done this whole year, right? You've done a great job. I love the versus Atlanta. We sprinkle a little bit more 2-man, kind of a little wrinkle versus Dallas in the first matchup, a little bit more cover 6, which they hadn't done a lot this year. It was the perfect kind of pitch at times. Just do what you've been doing, right? Do what you've been doing. I don't think we need to overthink it. They don't have a lot of teeth in terms of weapons. We got to stop the run. We got to play, kind of keep the halo over top, which is tough when you want to stop the run, but you can do some stuff with some quarters, some cover 6, some things like that, where you can get some better run fits for players and just have answers versus nickel runs. And I think you're going to be okay. Especially if the offense says, hey, we're going to get we accept the opening kickoff. We go down and score 7. Defense gets a 3 and out. We go down and score 7 again. To me, the game's over. And I think that's really what you're looking at in terms of game flow.
This is the rare situation where I would actually think about taking the opening kickoff. I'm typically anti that because the value of the double up, the ability to potentially have the ball at the end of the half and then score again and swing a game 14 points. That's one of the most valuable decisions I think a coach can make from a game management standpoint, or prevent the other team from doing that. And you saw that in the Atlanta game last week. They give up a silly field goal at the end of the half, but they're able to come back out in the second half and stem it versus, if Atlanta had just taken the ball. So another gift from Raheem Morris. Thank you, Ra. Much appreciate. But I do think, to your point this week, if you can get them to quit by halftime, well, shoot, let's get the extra possession in the first half. I'd actually consider it this week. The bigger decision that Dan Quinn and Joe Witt have to consider is who is actually playing this week and where. I think they have a decision to make up front with that nickel, what I'm going to call the nickel plus package, aka when Deron Payne is playing on the edge and how much to potentially deploy that. But before we get to that, who are they playing on the outside? Yeah. If Marshawn Lattimore, who was a DMP on Wednesday with a hamstring injury, is out another week, and it feels like, why would you rush him back and just hope that he's playing in the playoffs and give that hamstring as much time as possible? But Michael Davis, I think people realized suddenly, that's why Benjamin St-Juste was playing, is because the other option was not as good. I think those two were at their best probably this year when they were playing in rotation with Juice as the starter and Davis playing some. So do you go Davis? Do you go Juice? Do you go with the rotation? How much does it matter? Is it just try one, and if it's not going well, go to the other? What do you do opposite Mike Sainer still at outside corner?
Yeah, so to me, this is maybe derivative, but they're the same player in terms of like total ceiling, right? So like they both get you to 70% or whatever. I don't know, so, whatever, 7 out of 10. And what I mean by that is like when you watch Michael Davis, he's competitive in the run game. He's physical. He kind of has this like edge to his play, where he's a little handsy. Yeah, like he's a physical big guy, like, and that's what you get. Juiced is a significantly better coverage player to me. He just moves better. He understands, like, his athleticism is significantly better. But I do think he lacks the confidence that Michael Davis brings. So when Michael Davis is on the field, he's just a confident dude, right? And sometimes he can't athletically hang with some of these corners. He's a little stiff in the hips. He can't open up and run the same way that some of these guys can. But he brings this kind of edge to his game. And then when you watch St. Juiced, I think, again, the coverage ability, the movement skills are significantly better. Not quite as physical in the run game, not quite as urgent as Davis in terms of tackling. But I think, you kind of get a 8 in coverage for St. Juiced, but he's like a 5 tackler. And then it's kind of flipped for Davis. And I think there's value to both. And I think you got to really figure out who you want to be and what you want to be doing. And maybe this week, because the stopping the run is so important, you say Michael Davis gets the start. And again, he did some great stuff in the second half in terms of, fitting up on Drake London and setting a hard edge and forcing the run to cut back. And he's not afraid to go up and make tackles in the run game. So I don't know. To me, it's kind of 6 and 1/2 dozen in the other. Like if they start St. Juice, great. If they start Michael Davis, great. But you have to know what those players' strengths and weaknesses are, and you have to find ways to limit them. Like if you're going to play Michael Davis, like have him play a little bit more cover 2, or maybe it's more straight 3, like where you feel good about kind of him having a very clear role and being able to use his style of athleticism to kind of maintain the structure of the defense as you want it, right? So I think it's just understanding who you're getting. And I would probably lean ever so slightly to Michael Davis because of the run stuff this week. But again, like if you want just pure coverage opportunity, I think St. Juiced is better at that. But also, like when you watch St. Juiced, especially the last couple of weeks, he just looks so mentally frazzled, and Michael Davis has had games like that this year. I think back to the first New York Giants game where he really struggled versus Malik Neighbors, and kind of essentially gets himself benched, after that game. But he's a more confident player at the moment, right? I think, which is the thing where I would probably lean ever so slightly that direction, even though St. Juiced is the better athlete. He's long-armed. He's got the great three-cone
That said, Juice
stuff.
I felt like he played pretty well last week. His snaps were super limited.
I think that's the thing is he does play well, but you can tell there's moments where he doesn't believe in himself. And I don't know, you got to go talk to a sports psychologist or something, but like you can just see it in his game. And I'm a big St. Juice fan. I think he should be playing more, but you can tell there's a little bit of a mental nervousness with him. Yeah. And if I'm a coach, I'm kind of like, is he going to play? Is he going to play as well as I think he can play? Because that's starting caliber football. Or is he going to play the way he's been playing, or the way a not confident St. Juice plays, which is not good. And I think there's a range there. Whereas with Michael Davis, you kind of say like, because of his mental, he is. Yeah, you know what he is. And I think as a coach, there's value to it. And again, the physicality, the confidence, is valuable. And now again, like I said, like if you started St. Juice, great. If you started Michael Davis, great. Are they perfect football players? No. Right? And that's the thing is how do you call the game now to accommodate what they do well? And I think that's the $1 million question. But really, to me, they're so similar because of how you weigh, like, the
risk is similar.
Yeah, the risk is similar. Absolutely.
Yeah. I don't know. I think I would lean towards Juice,
which is I totally get. It's not a criticism of either player, but
yeah, I feel like I would probably lean towards some level of rotation, to be honest.
Yeah.
But I feel like last week he definitely played better. He actually had some nice run fits in the game, and I was like, okay, that was good. Yeah. He's willing to get in there. And that's the thing is like he's willing to do all that stuff. It's just like, are you good at it? And what happens when the NFL happens to you and you're not good at something or something goes poorly, like, can you just go and try again next time? And that's the thing I appreciate about like Sainer still had a nightmare game last week, but he just keeps going back and trying again and again and again and again. Like there's no breaking Mikey Sainer still. He's mentally tough, which is what you need to be as a corner. Look at Lattimore. Again, it's the Eagles. Like
100%, a great example.
AJ Brown got him sometimes, but Marshawn won some of those too, and you just, all right, fine, let's go to battle again. And so my hope would be that you can play Juice, have like Marshawn, your job is to be in Benjamin's ear and like hype him up and like let's do the little lockdown celebration, like whatever you want to do. Like let's get that guy's confidence up because the ceiling is just so much higher because of the athleticism. But I do like also if you're willing to call the game in a more restricted way, we're just going to play an S-ton of cover 2, put Michael Davis in a relatively small box, tell him to be physical. Please don't mash anybody in the face mask and pick up a stupid hands to the face penalty. And then let's go. Like I actually like that as well in terms of a plan. I just don't know that they want to limit themselves that much. But that is something to consider.
Yeah, and I think, when you look at Michael Davis, and again, we're being critical of both players, and I think he played well last week too in certain coverage situations, like the 2-man situations where you give him, it's not like straight man. Like it's not like he doesn't. I don't personally feel comfortable. They might feel comfortable with him living in that world, but again, like you get a better tackler, you get a more confident player, you get someone who's got. There's something to him right now. And again, I'm the first one to say this. I think St. Juste has a tremendous upside. But there's a mental element here that when you watch him, you're just kind of like, hey, man, like, chill out. Like, you know what I mean? Yeah. Like, everything's going to be okay. And so...
Yeah, I also think, though, that with Davis, the mental side is like the situational awareness. Like, the idea of, like, the penalty he picks up in the end zone, right? Mm-hmm. Okay, receivers on the end line, give him a little non-illegal shove out of bounds and like knock him out of the play. Like that's well coached. The problem is the ball's in the air. Can't do it while the ball's in the air because that becomes PI. Like I understand what he was trying to do, but the lack of situational awareness. And I think you could make that argument then either way of, okay, well, it was his first game back in a while. He played way more than he has in weeks. Like, in a second week back, can he knock some of that rust off and be more in tune with the game versus, that's just kind of who he is because the lack of athleticism, because of the lack of whatever, is he just going to commit silly penalties, costly penalties in big spots like he did last week, or give up something big in a big spot when it's vertical down the field and those, teams are in gotta have it situations and he just flat out can't keep up. And so that would be the kind of the key question. And they have so much more insight on the inside of the building than we do in terms of, okay, where are both of these guys at mentally? Because that does feel like the kind of critical decision making factor of deciding which guy's ceiling is worth pursuing,
Yeah, especially on a week. I think that's the thing. For the year, I think they showed you that they feel really confident about St. Juste's ceiling, but there were times where he struggled, right? And I think, now you're in a point where it's more of a game to game, who's going to give you what we need based on the game plan. And I think that's, again, something that people in the building have to determine. And again, they've done a great job this year of determining that. But so I guess basically like the long and short of it is like, I would not be surprised to see either one of them in there. You know what I mean? Like if they're like, oh, it's St. Juste this week, cool. If it's Davis this week, great. Like, because again, they're like the same. They're going to kind of give up Davis is going to give up penalties because he gets a little handsy. He's not as quick with his feet. And St. Juste is going to have like a weird bonehead thing where it's like, oh, I don't know why I didn't backpedal in cover 4. Like, I don't know why I didn't do that. Like, you know what I'm saying? They're just like, there's weird things like that. And so, like I think back to the Steelers game, like why you're playing the sticks, don't have any help over top and like stuff happens, you know what I mean? So,
Saints game, just smack a dude in the face.
Right.
Even though you're remotely involved in the play.
That was an accident, obviously, but that happens. And again, who's more confident? Who's going to give you the best opportunity based on the game plan to be successful? And I trust Joe Wood Jr. and Dan Quinn to make that assessment.
For sure. We don't have to discuss this at length because the corner discussion was, I think, the more pressing one. But I am definitely curious to see what they do with the personnel up front, especially if stopping the run is a huge goal. Do we see more of that Duran on the edge package? And could John play out there as well? I think that's something to watch. That could be a preview of things to come in the playoffs, especially if you think of some of their opponents. I was just thinking about this through the playoff or through the corner conversation. Like, dude, if you're playing the Rams, the way their receivers block, the way that Puka blocks, like that could be a Michael Davis. Hey, man, we need you to be super physical and take on a Puka Nacua block or a Cooper Kupp block in a playoff game. So that's something to kind of think about as we think ahead as well. But that'll do for now. Next time we see you will be either Sunday or Monday. We will react in some form or fashion to the Cowboys game and the playoff matchup. Unclear of whether that will be me and a special guest, whether that will be me and Logan as Logan makes his way back from Dallas and we just do it Monday morning. But we'll talk that out, and there will be once we make that decision, I'll let you guys know on the radio / on Instagram at Hoffman.sports. We'll post a little announcement there. So we'll get that all squared away and straightened out as we get into the weekend. Until then, enjoy the game. Happy New Year. And we'll see you next week for a tape review show and a playoff preview as well. Thanks for listening and watching Take Command. And we'll see you next time. For Logan, I'm Craig. See ya. Thanks for watching this clip of Take Command, which has a brand new home.
That's right. You can watch on YouTube at the Team 980.
You can also listen to full episodes in the free Odyssey app, which is now enabled with Apple CarPlay. So we'll just, follow you around.